An often repeated phrase you hear on my channel is, if you can draw a line, you can saw a line. But that kind of indicates that you're going to have the tools necessary to draw straight lines or precise angles. And one of the most common angles we use in woodworking is 90 degrees or square. So are you really sure that your squares are square? Here's the thing. For the most part, the squares we buy don't come perfect from the manufacturer. They're going to be a little bit off. It's just a manufacturing process. And the squares you make, obviously they're not going to be perfect right when you finish it. You got to tune them up. The only time you're ever going to get something that is really precise from the factory is when you're paying for a premium item that's their biggest marketing aspect, is the accuracy of the tool. And a lot of times those are going to be solid metal items. These are the only two tools in my entire collection of squares that I've never actually had to re-true up. I bought them for their accuracy so that I could use them to do metal other tools. And one key thing about them is they're generally solid pieces of machined metal. This one right here theoretically could go out of square. That's why they gave you these adjustment screws, but I've checked this one fairly frequently and I've never had to adjust it. The main thing being this main part right here is solid. So it's not going to move that much unless I grind off a little bit of the tool. And to re-square, you just re-loosen it, put it on something flat and re-tighten them to get these parallel. Now, to get that accuracy, as I said earlier, you're going to pay a premium. There is a lot of waste when you're making this kind of stuff and a lot of rejects, so that the manufacturers just have to charge more to cover that kind of stuff. Nothing's ever perfectly precise 100% of the time, so they end up throwing away a lot of product or recycling it. Hence, this one particular tool I am incredibly precious of. This is a tool that I use to set up my other tools. So you do not see me using this tool in my videos for laying stuff out. It has a permanent place. Even the wood is discolored because it's sitting there so long right here. And I pretty much never touch it unless I'm setting up another tool or checking another tool. This one right here I do use quite a bit. And I'm not overly precious of it, but I am weary of using it a whole bunch. But over the years, I've really come to like wooden tools for the simple reason they are so easy and quick to tune. And a lot of people think that you're going to have to constantly tune them up. But if you look at my bench, you will see lines all over the place because I am constantly, almost every project will come over here, draw a line, come back over, line it up, draw another line, and look for any variation there, because that will tell you whether it's accurate on a 90 degrees, assuming this right here is straight, which mine is pretty straight. If I'm testing something that doesn't have a fence, an item that kind of registers against it, well, a lot of times what I will do is I will create a fence, a little quick piece of wood right here, and now I can check for square by drawing a line, flipping it, and drawing another line, and checking the differences. And with wooden squares, what I've always found is you will tune them up when you first make them, and then you'll be paranoid and you'll be checking them constantly, and probably about a month later you'll retune it up again, whether it needs it or not. And then, maybe a year later you'll check it again, and it might be a fraction of a degree off, so you'll retune it up. But they kind of fit in a balance with the environment that you're working in, your shop. And my shop's air conditioned, so it's fairly consistent humidity. So they stabilize to be really accurate. But still, I check them all the time. Why? Because even my metal ones go out. This is a Starrett. This is a very premium layout tool, a combination square where you have 45, 90 degrees, you come back over here. Adjustable combination square. This is what they would consider top dog as far as accuracy. And when they come from the factory, they warranty them accuracy. This was a gift to me maybe a dozen years ago. It was used to that person and he gave it to me used, so I'm probably the third or fourth owner of this. I used this for about 5 years for most all my really accurate measurements, until one day when I was building a side table for a house, my joints weren't coming out right. So I went back and checked this. So here we go. Got a solid piece of tape right here, a very sharp pencil. We're going to draw a line, come back over, match this up, draw a second line. And notice it is closer here than it is there. We're only talking a fraction of a degree, but that is enough to throw off stuff if you're going all the way around longer pieces of work. Here's another example. This is one I bought. I don't know where I got it. It's an eye gauge. It's a pretty common square, but you would think they would come from the factory perfectly square, even over such a short distance as 2.5 inches. But come back over, you line it up, and you can see it's already touching the line up here, but it's not on bottom. So even this tool is inaccurate. But then you come back to a square I've made, and this is nothing special, but the line's right on top of it. And I point that out not saying that this thing I put together with a few bucks of wood is any better than these. It's just I use this all the time. I keep this tuned. Once I found that these were out, I very rarely use these for anything other than maybe depth measurements, that kind of stuff. But even these are tunable, as all you machinists out there are yelling at me about right now, saying you've got to take care of your tools. Well, that's what we're going to be discussing today, is how to tune up not only the wood ones, but your metal squares. And we'll go all the way from tiny ones up to the big framing squares. And at the end, there's one square I don't know how to retune up, but I'm not sure you really need to. Y'all tell me in the comments below. Now, the first thing I want to cover is what needs to be square. On a tool like this French square right here, basically what we do is we bump it up to something, and either using a knife, my preference, or a pencil, you draw your line. But notice I use this side. It would be nice if when you made this square, this side was squared up, but we don't trust that. That is why we have a shape right here to make it shorter, to indicate that we don't want to use this side over here. Also, you'll notice that this was a reference. So the only thing square on this tool is a line from this side over here. This side is not square at all. And that's one reason why we put a little line, something over here to extend out as a obstacle for drawing lines this way. So on this tool, repeat, the only thing that's square is here to here. Now on a mechanical, a metal square, theoretically, this is parallel. So you could draw interior lines, exterior lines, lines in the back, that kind of stuff, if you like set it up as a plumb like that kind of stuff. That's an advantage of metal squares. It's another advantage of plastic speed squares. And I do prefer plastics because they are easy to tune. The steel and aluminum ones, not so much. And if you picture it, you're using the same reference points as a wood one. It's just referencing this to that. Now, when you have a framing square, something like this right here, you don't have a reference on the side. So a lot of times when I am testing these, my trick is I will find a board or something like that, I'll bump it up against my edge, and then I have a fence to guarantee that this line that I'm drawing is going to be the same for each side, obviously assuming that this edge right here is straight, which mine is. Now to tune a wooden square, it's this simple. I come back over, I draw a line, there we go. I flip it, get as close as I can to that line, and I draw another line. Now this square right here is purely decorative for me. I have another wooden square that I depend upon, but we'll go ahead and true this one up just to show you. So I draw another line. Notice that the line is really close here, but far away over here. So this square is out this like that. So I need to remove material from this side and not so much on this side. So we grab a tool we're going to use to straighten it out. I'm using a jack plane as a jointer because it is pretty much the length of what I want to do. And the general rule of thumb is to get something flat, you just need a tool that is, at least a third the length of it. So this is more than good enough. I've also set it up so it is taking the absolute thinnest shaving it possibly can, and I'm going to start removing material from this side. Now I can tell the grain is coming this way, so I want to come this way. So what I will do is I will do a lifting cut, and I'm just going to lift off a little bit. I'm only going so far, then the next cut I'll go so far, the next cut I'll go so far, next cut I'll go so far. The thing to remember is the shaving you're taking off, that is twice the distance of the area you're correcting, because 90 degrees comes from both sides. So it's double that one. So you only want to take off enough that you meet the distance. You only want to take off enough so that it takes care of the error. There we go. Test it out. So this is how much shavings I took off on this side. And you can see I basically cut that down a quarter. So really I could probably take 2 swipes this next time and get it dead perfect. 1, 2. I took a full length shaving so I know it's as straight as this plane could make. Freshly sharpen a pencil and test again. Almost perfect, but not quite there. 2 more stripes, but you get where we're going. Now, when I was teaching, I didn't make a bunch of these kind of squares for students. I just went out and bought some cheap plastic ones. And it didn't really matter the manufacturer to me because I know from the factory, these are not accurate. I went and bought this one just to prove that point. Never been used. I probably should have tested this in the store before I did it in the video, but here we go. 1 line, flip it around. Now I have found that the plastic ones are the most accurate. This one actually is pretty good. It's pretty close. There's a little difference, but good enough for woodworking. But if you're in the store, the easiest way to check them is to grab 2 because you can see a little bit of light up here. I mean, it's about as thick as my pencil coming down here. So one of these is off. And whenever I go to the store, if I'm buying these, I'm generally going to buy 2 of them. You go find something flat like a jointer edge or something like that, and you match them up and you find 2 that touch top and bottom, and then go get a third one and verify it. Because sometimes you might just happen to get 2 that are perfectly off the same and match it up. So you just kind of have to play around with a bunch of them until you get one that is just dead perfect. But even if they aren't perfect, yeah, this blue one's off. It's going this way right here. So I actually need to remove a little bit of material right here. And I can use the same exact technique I did with the wooden ones with this one. I'm just going to drop in my vise and use my hand plane to square it up. It planes just like wood. The only way I could see doing a metal one or aluminum like that would be on the table saw. Now, I do production runs of these types of squares and that English type of squares every few years. And the last production run, I made 250 of these. And I'm sold out at the moment. I'll probably do another production run out there. They're just one way I help subsidize this channel. And when I do that one, I can tell you, I am not going and doing them by hand. I will make a jig, or I've made a jig that sits on here where I can push this against it, lock it together, and I can cut this side perfectly 90 degrees. But if you're not making, 250, 300 of something like that, there's no reason making a jig. But there is one thing I need you to understand. Whether it is wood, plastic, or aluminum, know what parts are square. Remember me talking. It's this and this. So me coming over here and putting it against my reference point on this side will not make this and this square. It will make this and this square, which is what we don't want. So when you're doing it, you need to find something so you can hold it like this against your fence. What I have done in the past is I have some jigs that was set up, that hook up there, that are, these two are perfectly parallel, so I can now do it like this to move it across the blade. So you just extend it out somehow to make it so that this and this are what you're referencing. Now for those of y'all that use metal squares, you have it even worse, because those are so much more out of square. These kind of steel and aluminum ones, and if you're getting them, get the steel ones. They are so much easier to tune than the aluminum ones. I challenge you to go to them. I mean, look at that. That is quite literally a 1/4 of an inch out over 24 inches. Is that not ridiculous? And these are pretty good. This one's Dad's, this one's mine. I've tuned this one up already, hence a check mark. So I know that entire error is on this one. And I just verified it. It's thinner here than it is there. So, how do we tune this? Well, what I need to happen is to get this wing to bend this way. And I don't really want to affect the straightness, even though this actually is pretty accurate for, framing work and stuff like that, but we want to make it more accurate. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scribe a line from this point to that point. So you want to scribe a pretty heavy line, because that's going to be a reference line coming through. I did the best I could with that right there. And now I actually want to bend this side that way. So if I take a steel punch and I come up and put it right on that line and just give it a good whack, nice little divot right there, that will actually push the metal back, and you might have to make more and more. If I needed to bring it this way, I would put a whack on this corner, and you will see true carpenters that have been at this a long while, their steel squares might have a bunch of hits on them because they're constantly having to readjust them as they get damaged for whatever reason. One more time, just spread it out. I put it right on the line. I give it a whack. And don't be afraid of whacking on both sides. So it took me this much whacking, and it now matches up pretty close, good enough for a rafter square in my opinion, top to bottom. Let's see if I can zoom out so you can see. Well, you have to trust me, it's top to bottom. Got pretty even light all the way down. Now tuning metal squares like my stair and this eye gauge, it's entirely doable. I haven't done it yet over all these years because I don't really use these tools for layout anymore. I have them more for depth gauging and straight lines and stuff like that. I really need to tune this one up. I know how to do it. I've done it in the past on other squares that I've given away in toolkits and stuff like that. I just haven't here, but I'm going to explain it to you mainly because I don't have the camera equipment to zoom in tight enough at the angles, right angles to film it. So what you're going to want to do is order a file that is thinner than the blade you're doing on there. And when they build these, they understand you're going to have to periodically retune them. So if you notice in the machining, and again, this is as close as I can get my camera and stay in focus. Right here, you see how it's not flat on bottom, it has a little lip in the front, and that is the same on this side. There's a little lip. But if you were able to look in the middle, I'm hoping that with a white camera, you can see that doesn't go all the way through. See that? It doesn't quite go all the way through. It's the same on these really cheap ones. Can you see that? There's that little lip. I hope that's in focus. Little lip right there and right there. So what you have is a square and the ruler, and they've got a cutout. The bottom of the cutout is below that right there. But they have these lips that ruler rides on that comes over like that. Okay? So there's not much metal on either side, and by having that dip in the middle, either from a saw blade cutting that groove, so it's kind of like this, or they actually mill it down in the middle for the locking mechanism. However they do it, it's not solid all the way underneath. So you can lower this side or this side to adjust that angle right there. But the first thing you need to do is give this thing a very deep clean, because gunk binds up in this middle section, and a lot of times it'll sit over there or sit over there, and that's what will throw it off. A lot of the squares that I've done, I've just put it in a chemical machine cleaning setup, left it overnight or something like that, come back, reassembled it, and it got back to square because that gunk got dissolved. Other times on the cheap, and that's normally what happens when my stairs go out. I should probably do it to this one. But on the very cheap ones, you have to take that mill file, that really thin file of some type, and just take 1 or 2 swipes and then test it. Because you're talking a very short distance, so any minute measurement change will affect the ruler on a long ways out. Or if you do buy a Starrett or a really expensive one, just send it back. Some of them will fix them up for a fee, some of them fix them up for free, some of them will replace them not knowing what's going on. But if you pay an ultra premium, that's kind of the service you should be expecting. If you're just buying the cheapest one off of Amazon, tune it up, get back to work, or don't worry about it. You only have to be so accurate with woodworking. Now, I told you at the beginning that there was one square that I really didn't know how to fix, and I wasn't really sure I needed to fix it. You know, these drywall squares. And drywalling is such a rough area. If you got an 1/8 of an inch gap, that's no big deal. I do know that over this length, this thing is way off, but it still cuts drywall for the little bit I do. These things are kind of bratted on. I really don't know how to adjust them. If you do, leave a comment down below, other than just drilling it all out and rebuilding the whole thing, or just making your own. But it's drywalling. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, picked up a few tips and tricks like that, learned a few things, and in the end, I want you to remember that it's always worth the effort to learn, create, and share with others. Y'all be safe and have fun.